Rich man hit a biker's dog with his car. The bikers gave him a lesson he'll never forget. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the winding roads of the West Hills neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the scent of pine trees mixed with the distant aroma of coffee from the city below. It was the kind of perfect September day that made people fall in love with the Pacific Northwest. Jake Thompson guided his Harley-Davidson through the gentle curves of Skyline Boulevard, his leather jacket creaking softly with each movement. At 42 years old, Jake had the weathered look of someone who'd lived a full life. Crow's feet around his kind brown eyes, a salt-and-pepper beard, and hands calloused from years of honest work as a motorcycle mechanic. But it was his smile that defined him, warm and genuine, the kind that made strangers feel like old friends. Running alongside his bike, tongue lolling happily, was Duke, a 3-year-old German Shepherd mix with golden-brown fur and intelligent eyes that seemed almost human in their expressiveness. Duke had been Jake's constant companion since he'd rescued him from a shelter 2 years ago. The dog had been starved, abused, and terrified of everything. Jake had spent countless hours rehabilitating him, teaching him to trust again, to play, to love. Now, Duke was healthy, confident, and utterly devoted to his human. "Good boy, Duke, keep up," Jake called out, his voice full of affection. They were on their weekly trail ride, a ritual that had become sacred to both of them. Duke loved these runs almost as much as Jake loved watching him enjoy them. The road ahead was relatively quiet, lined with towering Douglas firs and the occasional luxury home tucked back from the street. Jake slowed down as they approached a narrow section where the road curved sharply to the right. He knew this area well. Wealthy residents sometimes drove too fast, too confident in their expensive cars and their assumed right-of-way. As Jake and Duke rounded the bend, Duke suddenly spotted a squirrel darting across the road, about 50 yards ahead. Before Jake could react, Duke bolted forward with the enthusiasm only a dog chasing a squirrel could possess. "Duke, stay!" Jake shouted, but the command came too late. Duke was already racing ahead, his powerful legs eating up the distance. At that exact moment, a gleaming silver Mercedes-Benz S-Class came screaming around the opposite curve, going at least 20 miles over the speed limit. Behind the wheel was Marcus Blackwood, a 55-year-old real estate developer whose face was permanently set in an expression of irritated impatience. He was on his phone, arguing with his lawyer about a contract dispute, barely glancing at the road. "I don't care what the zoning commission says, Thompson. Make it happen, or I'll find someone who can." Marcus snapped into his Bluetooth headset, his fingers drumming impatiently on the steering wheel. Jake saw the Mercedes, and his heart seized in his chest. "Duke!" he screamed, gunning his motorcycle forward, but it was too late. The impact happened in slow motion, and all at once. The Mercedes struck Duke with a sickening thud that echoed through the trees. The dog's body was thrown 15 feet through the air before landing hard on the shoulder of the road. The squirrel, oblivious to the tragedy, disappeared into the underbrush. "No!" Jake's voice was a raw howl of anguish. He skidded his bike to a stop and ran to where Duke lay motionless, his chest barely rising and falling. Blood seeped from the dog's mouth and a gash on his side. "No, no, no, buddy! Stay with me!" "Please stay with me." The Mercedes had screeched to a stop, about 30 feet past the point of impact. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and Marcus Blackwood stepped out, straightening his $1,000 suit jacket. His expression was one of annoyance rather than concern. "Your dog ran into the road," Marcus said coldly, not even approaching to check on the animal. "He came out of nowhere. This is your fault for not having him on a leash." Jake looked up from Duke, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he cradled the injured dog. "You were speeding. You weren't even watching the road. I saw you on your phone." "I most certainly was not on my phone," Marcus lied smoothly, though his Bluetooth earpiece was still visible in his ear. "And I was going the speed limit. Again, your dog ran into traffic. If there are any damages to my vehicle, you'll be hearing from my lawyer." "Damages to your vehicle?" Jake's voice was barely a whisper, strangled by emotion. "My dog is dying and you're worried about your car." Duke whimpered softly, and Jake's attention immediately returned to him. The dog's eyes were open but glazed with pain. His breathing was shallow and irregular. Jake's hands shook as he gently stroked Duke's head. "I'm calling an ambulance for him," Jake said, reaching for his phone. "An ambulance? For a dog?" Marcus scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous." "Look, I'm a busy man. I don't have time for this. Here." He pulled out his wallet and extracted several $100 bills, holding them out like they were a generous gift. "Take this for your trouble. Buy yourself a new dog. Now, I need to get going." The sight of the money, offered so casually as if Duke's life could be purchased and replaced, snapped something in Jake. He stood up slowly, his full 6'2" frame unfolding like a thunderstorm about to break. His fists clenched at his sides. "Get away from us," Jake said, each word precise and deadly quiet. Marcus must have seen something dangerous in Jake's eyes, because he actually took a step back. But his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. "Don't threaten me, biker trash. I have lawyers who'll bury you. This was clearly your fault, and if you know what's good for you, you'll take the money and forget this ever happened." Marcus threw the bills on the ground near Jake's feet, got back in his Mercedes, and drove away without another word, his tires spitting gravel. Jake watched the silver car disappear around the bend, memorizing the license plate, BLKWDCO. Then he turned back to Duke, forcing himself to focus on what mattered. He carefully lifted the dog, cradling him like a child, and carried him to his motorcycle. Using his leather jacket, he created a makeshift sling to hold Duke against his chest. "Hang on, buddy, just hang on," Jake whispered, his tears dripping onto Duke's fur. "We're going to get you help. You're going to be okay. You have to be okay." He mounted his bike with excruciating care and began the fastest, most careful ride of his life toward the Portland Veterinary Emergency Clinic in southeast Portland, 15 minutes away. Every second felt like an hour. Duke's warm blood soaked through Jake's shirt. The dog's breathing grew more labored with each passing minute. Jake talked to Duke the entire way, his voice cracking with emotion. "Remember when I first brought you home? You were so scared of everything, wouldn't even eat from my hand. But you learned to trust me. You learned to be happy again. We've got more adventures ahead of us, Duke. That trail we've been wanting to try in Mount Hood, teaching you to swim in the Columbia River. You can't give up now. I won't let you give up." "Udaim." When Jake burst through the emergency clinic doors with Duke in his arms, still wrapped in his blood-soaked leather jacket, the staff immediately sprang into action. Dr. Sarah Chen, the veterinarian on duty, took one look at Duke and began barking orders to her team. Possible internal bleeding, visible external trauma, signs of shock. Get him on oxygen now and prep for emergency surgery. She pointed at Jake. "What happened?" "He was hit by a car," Jake managed to say, his voice breaking. "The guy was speeding on his phone and he just hit Duke and drove away. Said I should buy a new dog." Dr. Chen's expression hardened. She was in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and hands that moved with practiced precision. "We're going to do everything we can for him, but I need you to understand. The next few hours are critical. He's got multiple injuries, and I won't know the full extent until we get him stabilized and into surgery." "Money isn't an issue," Jake said immediately. "Whatever it takes, he's all I've got." Dr. Chen placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, and in that simple gesture, Jake saw genuine compassion. "I know. Go to the waiting room. I'll update you as soon as I can." As the medical team wheeled Duke away, the dog lifted his head slightly and looked back at Jake one more time. Their eyes met, and Jake felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. Then Duke was gone through the swinging doors, and Jake was alone. He sank into a chair in the waiting room, his hands still stained with Duke's blood, his leather jacket ruined, his whole body shaking. The adrenaline that had kept him moving was beginning to fade, leaving behind a hollow ache that felt like it would consume him. Jake pulled out his phone with trembling fingers. He needed to call someone, needed to not be alone with this pain. He scrolled through his contacts and found the name he was looking for: Tommy Wrench Martinez, president of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, of which Jake was a proud member. "Hey, brother," Wrench answered on the second ring, his voice warm and gravelly. "What's going on?" And Jake told him everything. About Duke chasing the squirrel, about the silver Mercedes going too fast, about Marcus Blackwood's cold indifference and the money thrown on the ground like Duke's life was worth nothing more than a few $100s. About how Duke was in emergency surgery right now and might not make it through the night. By the time Jake finished, his voice was hoarse from crying, and there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Wrench spoke, and his voice had turned to steel. "Give me the license plate number." "Wrench, I needed to tell someone. I'm not asking." "Give me the plate number, Jake," Wrench repeated, and Jake could hear the rustling of movement in the background. "Nobody does this to one of our own. Nobody hurts our family and walks away like it doesn't matter. We're brothers, Jake. Your pain is our pain. Now give me that plate number." Jake recited it. "BLKWDCO. "We'll find him," Wrench promised. "You stay with Duke. Keep us updated on how he's doing. And Jake, Duke's a fighter. He survived what happened to him before you found him. He'll survive this too." After they hung up, Jake settled in for what would be the longest wait of his life. The clinic's waiting room was quiet, except for the ticking of a clock on the wall and the occasional soft murmur of staff in the hallway. Jake stared at his blood-stained hands, at the empty collar he'd pulled off Duke before they wheeled him away, and wondered how the world could be so cruel. 3 hours later, Dr. Chen emerged from the surgical suite, still in her scrubs. Her face was exhausted but professionally neutral. Jake stood up so fast he nearly fell over. "He made it through surgery," Dr. Chen said, and Jake's knees nearly buckled with relief. "But he's not out of the woods yet. He had a ruptured spleen, which we removed, 2 broken ribs, and significant bruising to his lungs. The next 48 hours are critical. If he can get through that without complications, his prognosis is good. But Jake..." She paused, making sure he was listening. "He's going to need extensive care and physical therapy. It'll be a long recovery." "Can I see him?" Jake asked, his voice small and hopeful. "He's in recovery now, heavily sedated. You can see him for a few minutes, but he won't be responsive." Dr. Chen led Jake to the recovery area, where Duke lay on a soft bed, his side shaved and covered with bandages, tubes and monitors attached to him. He looked so small and vulnerable, nothing like the energetic, joyful dog who'd been running beside Jake's motorcycle just hours ago. Jake knelt beside the bed and carefully placed his hand on Duke's head, stroking gently. "Hey, buddy, you made it through the hard part. Now you just need to rest and get strong again. I'll be right here. I'm not going anywhere." A single tear dropped from Jake's cheek onto Duke's fur, and Jake made a silent promise to his best friend. The man who did this would face consequences, not violence. Jake wasn't that kind of person, and he knew revenge through brutality would only make things worse. But justice would be served, one way or another. As Jake sat beside Duke in the quiet recovery room somewhere across Portland, Wrench was making phone calls of his own, and the wheels of something much larger than Jake could imagine were beginning to turn. The Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club's clubhouse was located in a converted warehouse in southeast Portland's industrial district, a neighborhood that had somehow managed to resist gentrification despite the city's rapid changes. The building's exterior was deliberately unremarkable. Weathered brick, a simple sign, nothing that would attract unwanted attention. But inside, it was home for the 27 members who'd built a brotherhood based on loyalty, respect, and taking care of their own. When Wrench called for an emergency meeting the night of Duke's accident, every member who could make it showed up. They gathered in the main room, a space decorated with motorcycle memorabilia, club patches from across the country, and photos documenting years of rides, charity events, and memories. Wrench stood at the front, his imposing 6'4" frame casting a long shadow. At 58, he was the oldest member of the club, with grey streaking through his long hair and beard. His arms were covered in faded tattoos that told the story of a life well lived. Despite his intimidating appearance, those who knew him understood that Wrench was a man of principle, someone who believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. "Most of you already heard what happened to Duke," Wrench began, his deep voice carrying easily through the room. "For those who haven't, our brother Jake's dog was hit by some rich asshole in a Mercedes who was speeding and on his phone. The guy didn't even apologize. Threw some cash at Jake like he could just buy a new dog and move on. Duke's alive, but barely. He's looking at months of recovery, if he makes it at all." A murmur of anger rippled through the assembled bikers. Many of them knew Duke, had watched him transform from a scared rescue dog into the confident, happy companion who often accompanied Jake to club events. "The plate number came back to a Marcus Blackwood," continued Wrench, reading from his phone. "CEO of Blackwood Development Corporation. Lives in a $8 million house in the West Hills. This guy's loaded. Commercial real estate, luxury condos, the whole deal. And from what I can tell, he's got a reputation for being exactly the kind of person you'd expect. Entitled, arrogant, and used to getting his way." "So, what's the play?" asked Razor, the club's sergeant-at-arms, a lean man in his 40s with sharp features and sharper instincts. "We talking legal route or—" "Legal," Wrench said firmly. "I know some of you are thinking about alternatives, but that's not who we are. We're not criminals. We're not vigilantes. We're men who believe in justice through the proper channels. Jake's filing a police report tomorrow, and he's going to pursue this through the legal system. That system's rigged for guys like Blackwood," someone called out from the back. "He's probably got lawyers on retainer who'll make this disappear." "Maybe," Wrench acknowledged. "But we're not just going to sit back and watch. We're going to make sure this story gets told. We're going to make sure people know what Marcus Blackwood did, and we're going to support Jake every step of the way. Financially, emotionally, whatever he needs." Sarah Nomad Williams stood up. At 34, she was one of only 3 female members of the Iron Wolves, a skilled tattoo artist with a keen mind and a strong moral compass. "I've got a friend who works at the Oregonian," she said, referring to Portland's major newspaper. "She's always looking for human interest stories. I think she'd be very interested in hearing about a wealthy developer who hit a dog and left the scene." "Perfect," Wrench nodded. "Let's document everything. Jake, you said you saw him on his phone. That's not just reckless driving, that's criminal negligence. We need to gather evidence, talk to anyone who might have seen the incident, and build a solid case." The meeting continued for another hour, with the club members organizing themselves into different tasks: legal research, media outreach, financial support for Duke's medical bills, and emotional support for Jake. By the time they dispersed, the Iron Wolves had transformed from an angry group seeking revenge into a coordinated team pursuing justice. The next morning, Jake sat in the Portland Police Bureau's East Precinct, filling out a report with Officer Jennifer Park, a patient woman in her 30s who actually seemed to care about what had happened. "So, let me make sure I have this right," Officer Park said, reviewing her notes. "The vehicle was going approximately 20 miles over the posted speed limit. The driver was on his phone at the time of impact, and after hitting your dog, he left the scene without providing insurance information or offering assistance." "That's right," Jake confirmed, his voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on him. He'd spent the night at the vet clinic, refusing to leave Duke's side. "He did stop briefly, but only to blame me and throw money at me before driving off." Officer Park's expression showed clear disapproval. "And you're certain about the license plate?" "Positive. BLKWDCO. I memorized it specifically because I knew this would be important." "Okay, Mr. Thompson, I'm going to be honest with you. Cases like this can be challenging. Oregon law does require drivers to stop and render aid after hitting an animal. But the penalties are usually minimal, especially if the driver claims the animal ran into traffic. However, the fact that he was using his phone and speeding could work in your favor. I'll file this report and forward it to traffic enforcement, but I'd also encourage you to pursue this through civil court. What about criminal charges? Jake asked. Officer Park hesitated. That would be up to the district attorney, and they typically don't prosecute these kinds of cases unless there are significant aggravating factors. But I'll make sure everything is documented properly. Jake left the police station feeling deflated. The officer had been kind, but he could read between the lines. Nothing was likely to happen. Marcus Blackwood was wealthy and connected, and Duke was, in the eyes of the law, just property, not a life that mattered. Over the next 3 days, Jake divided his time between the veterinary clinic and his motorcycle shop. Duke was slowly improving, becoming more alert and responsive, though he was clearly in pain and confused about what had happened. Every time Jake visited, Duke's tail would wag weakly, and those intelligent eyes would focus on his human with absolute trust. It broke Jake's heart every time. Sarah's media connection had come through. Rachel Kim, a reporter for the Oregonian, had reached out to interview Jake about what happened. They met at a coffee shop in northeast Portland on a cool morning, the sky heavy with the threat of rain. Rachel was in her late 20s, energetic and sharp, with a recorder and notebook at the ready. "Thank you for agreeing to talk with me, Mr. Thompson. I understand this must be a difficult time." "Call me Jake," he said, stirring his coffee without really seeing it. "And yes, it's been hard. But I want people to know what happened, not for revenge or anything like that. I just want accountability." "Tell me about Duke," Rachel prompted gently, and Jake did. He told her about finding Duke at the shelter, emaciated and terrified, unable to even make eye contact. He described the months of patient work to help the dog heal, both physically and emotionally. He talked about the joy of watching Duke learn to play, to trust, to love. He showed her photos on his phone, Duke as a scared rescue, Duke grinning on the back of his motorcycle, Duke running joyfully through Forest Park. "He's not just a pet," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's family. He saved me as much as I saved him. I went through a bad divorce 5 years ago, lost my business partner, was in a really dark place. Duke gave me a reason to keep going, and now..." Rachel's expression was sympathetic. "And what happened on September 18th? Jake recounted the accident in detail, his voice steady, but his hands clenched around his coffee cup. He described Marcus Blackwood's attitude, the money thrown on the ground, the complete lack of concern for Duke's suffering. "I called the police, filed a report," Jake continued, "but I get the sense that nothing's going to happen. This guy's rich, he's got lawyers, and in the eyes of the law, Duke's just property. There's no real consequences for what he did." "Have you tried reaching out to Mr. Blackwood directly?" Rachel asked. "His office wouldn't even let me pass the receptionist. I tried to call, sent emails, nothing. It's like once he drove away that day, he just erased us from his mind." Rachel made notes, her expression thoughtful. "Would you be willing to let me try to get a statement from him? For the article?" "Of course. Though I doubt he'll talk to you either." The article ran 2 days later, on a Sunday morning, in the local news section of the Oregonian. The headline read, "Man's Best Friend, Local Biker Seeks Justice After Dog Hit by Speeding Driver." It was a well-written piece, balanced but clearly sympathetic to Jake's perspective. Rachel had included the facts about Marcus Blackwood, his company, his wealth, his residence in the West Hills, though the article carefully avoided making direct accusations without proof. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The online version of the article was shared thousands of times on social media. People were outraged. Many commented with their own stories of pets being hit by careless drivers, of the pain of losing an animal family member, of the frustration of wealthy people facing no consequences for their actions. Jake's social media accounts were flooded with messages of support, offers to help with Duke's medical bills, and expressions of anger at Marcus Blackwood. A GoFundMe page that Nomad had set up to help with expenses raised over $15,000 in the first 24 hours. But along with the support came something else. Information. People who knew Marcus Blackwood began coming forward with stories. A former employee who'd been fired for questioning a questionable deal. Neighbors who complained about his aggressive driving through the residential neighborhood. Contractors who'd been stiffed on payments. A pattern emerged of a man who believed rules didn't apply to him, who used his wealth and connections to avoid consequences. On Tuesday morning, Jake received a phone call from an unknown number. When he answered, a smooth, professional voice greeted him. "Mr. Thompson, this is Richard Caldwell from Caldwell, Morris & Associates. I represent Marcus Blackwood. I'm calling regarding the unfortunate incident involving your animal." Jake's grip tightened on his phone. "Go on." "Mr. Blackwood has asked me to extend an offer of settlement. He's willing to pay for your dog's veterinary expenses, up to a reasonable amount, of course, in exchange for your agreement to cease all media contact and social media commentary regarding this matter. Additionally, you would need to make a public statement acknowledging that the incident was an accident and that Mr. Blackwood bears no fault. Is that so?" Jake's voice was dangerously quiet. "And what exactly does Mr. Blackwood consider a reasonable amount?" "We're prepared to offer $10,000, which we believe is more than fair compensation for a dog." Jake took a deep breath, counting to 10 before responding. "Let me make something very clear, Mr. Caldwell. My dog's life isn't for sale. Duke isn't a possession. He's family. Your client was speeding, he was on his phone, and he left the scene of an accident. Those are facts, not slander. So you can tell Mr. Blackwood that he can take his settlement offer and—" Jake paused, choosing his next words carefully, "and reconsider it. Because I'm not interested in being paid off. I'm interested in accountability. Mr. Thompson, I should advise you that if you continue your media campaign, Mr. Blackwood is prepared to pursue legal action for defamation and—" Jake hung up. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, from pure distilled anger. Marcus Blackwood was trying to silence him with money and threats, just like he'd tried to silence him at the scene of the accident. That evening, at another Iron Wolves meeting, Jake told the club about the phone call. The response was exactly what he'd hoped for. They were more determined than ever to stand by him. "This confirms what we already knew," Wrench said. "This guy thinks he's untouchable. He thinks he can make problems go away with his checkbook. Well, we're going to show him that some things can't be bought." "What's Duke's condition?" Nomad asked. Jake smiled for the first time in days, a genuine smile. "Dr. Chen says he's improving faster than expected. She thinks he'll be able to come home in a few more days, though he'll need months of physical therapy. She said he's fighting hard to get better, like he knows he needs to get back to me." "That's a good boy," someone called out, and there were murmurs of agreement. "So, what's our next move?" Razor asked. Wrench stood up, his expression determined. "We're going to give Mr. Blackwood something he's never experienced before, a lesson in humility, not through violence, not through anything illegal, but through something far more powerful, community action." "What did you have in mind?" Jake asked. Wrench smiled, and there was something almost predatory in that smile. "You'll see, brother. You'll see." Marcus Blackwood sat in his corner office on the 12th floor of the Blackwood Building in downtown Portland, staring at his computer screen with growing irritation. For the past 3 days, his inbox had been flooded with emails about the dog incident. His company's social media accounts were bombarded with negative comments. The article in the Oregonian had spawned countless blog posts, videos, and discussions across multiple platforms. It was ridiculous, completely absurd. It was just a dog, an animal that had run into traffic, and yet somehow this had become a PR nightmare. His assistant, Monica, knocked tentatively on his door. "Mr. Blackwood, there's a situation downstairs." "What kind of situation?" Marcus snapped, not looking up from his screen. There are motorcycles, a lot of motorcycles. They're circling the block, and some of them have parked in front of the building. They're not doing anything illegal, but the noise is disturbing other tenants, and people are starting to gather. Marcus stood up and walked to his window. Down below he could see them. At least 30 motorcycles, riding slowly in an organized loop around the block. They weren't speeding, weren't breaking any traffic laws, but their presence was unmistakable. Many of the bikes had Iron Wolves patches on them, and some riders carried signs that read, "Justice for Duke" and "Slow down, save lives." "Get security to move them along," Marcus ordered. "Sir, they're on public streets. Security can't do anything unless they're on private property." Marcus's jaw clenched. This was harassment, pure and simple. He pulled out his phone and called Richard Caldwell. "The bikers are outside my building," Marcus said without preamble, "circling like vultures. I want you to get an injunction, a restraining order, whatever it takes to make them go away." "Marcus," Caldwell said carefully, "they're exercising their First Amendment rights. As long as they're not blocking traffic or making threats, there's nothing illegal about what they're doing. So I'm supposed to just let them harass me? I'd recommend ignoring them. They'll get bored and leave eventually." But they didn't leave. The protest continued all day, with riders rotating in and out, so that there was always a presence outside the Blackwood building. News crews showed up, interviewing protesters and capturing footage of the peaceful demonstration. By evening, the story had made it onto local TV news. The next day, it got worse. Marcus arrived at his West Hills home to find his street lined with motorcycles, not blocking his driveway, not on his property, but parked legally along the public street. Riders stood in small groups, talking quietly, occasionally waving at passing cars. Some held signs. Others just stood there, a silent, leather-clad presence that made it clear, "We're watching." "This is insane," Marcus muttered, pulling into his driveway. He got out of his Mercedes, pointedly ignoring the bikers, and walked to his front door. As he reached for his keys, one of the bikers called out to him, "Mr. Blackwood, we'd like to talk to you about Duke." Marcus didn't respond, didn't even turn around. He went inside and immediately called the police. Officer Park was the one who responded. She listened to Marcus's complaint, then went outside to talk to the protesters. When she came back, her expression was professionally neutral. "Sir, they're not breaking any laws. They're on public property. They're not making threats. And they're exercising their right to peaceful assembly. There's nothing I can do. Nothing you can do. They're harassing me in my own home. They're protesting your actions, sir. That's protected speech. If you feel threatened, I'd recommend speaking with them, perhaps trying to resolve the underlying issue." "The underlying issue is that a dog ran into traffic," Marcus said coldly. Officer Park's expression shifted slightly, a subtle hardening around her eyes. "Sir, according to the police report filed by Mr. Thompson, you were exceeding the speed limit and using your phone while driving. You also left the scene without providing proper information. Those are serious violations. That report is inaccurate. I was doing nothing wrong. Then I'm sure traffic enforcement will sort that out. In the meantime, these protesters have every right to be here. Good evening, sir." After Officer Park left, Marcus stood at his window watching the bikers. They'd set up folding chairs now, settling in like they planned to stay. Some were eating sandwiches, others were talking and laughing. They looked comfortable, patient, like they had all the time in the world. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Helplessness. His money, his lawyers, his connections, none of it mattered. These people weren't intimidated by him. They weren't going away. The protests continued for a week. The Iron Wolves were careful to remain legal and peaceful, but they were relentless. They rotated locations, sometimes at Marcus's home, sometimes at his office, sometimes at properties his company was developing. They distributed flyers detailing Duke's story and Marcus's response. They organized a slow ride through the West Hills neighborhood, traveling at exactly the speed limit, a pointed demonstration of how fast people should be driving in residential areas. The media coverage was constant. Rachel Kim from The Oregonian wrote a follow-up article examining Portland's traffic safety laws and the lack of serious consequences for drivers who hit animals. A local TV station did a segment on Duke's recovery, showing heartwarming footage of the dog taking his first tentative steps after surgery, Jake encouraging him every step of the way. Public opinion had fully turned against Marcus. His company's Yelp page was flooded with one-star reviews, which Yelp eventually had to remove, but not before they'd been screenshot and spread across social media. His other business ventures were being scrutinized. A city council member called for a review of Blackwood Development's contracts with the city, but the most powerful moment came when the Iron Wolves organized a community vigil. It took place in Waterfront Park, along the Willamette River, on a cool Saturday evening. Hundreds of people showed up, not just bikers, but dog lovers, traffic safety advocates, community members who were tired of wealthy individuals facing no consequences for their actions. They brought their dogs, held candles, and listened as speaker after speaker shared stories of pets they'd lost, of the pain of losing a family member to a preventable accident. Jake stood on the small stage, Duke, still moving carefully, but standing proud, beside him on a leash. When Jake began to speak, his voice was clear and steady, amplified by the sound system so everyone could hear. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," Jake began. "When Duke was hit, I thought I was going to lose him. The doctors told me he might not make it through the night, but Duke fought. He fought because he's strong, because he's loved, and because he knew I needed him." Jake paused, his hand resting on Duke's head. The dog looked up at him with complete trust. "I'm not here for revenge," Jake continued. "I'm here for accountability. I'm here because what happened to Duke could happen to anyone's pet, anyone's family member. I'm here because we need to remember that driving is a responsibility, not a right. When you get behind the wheel of a car, you're operating a 2-ton machine that can kill. It doesn't matter how rich you are, how busy you are, or how important you think you are, you still have to follow the rules. You still have to care about the lives around you." The crowd applauded, and Jake could see people wiping tears from their eyes. "Marcus Blackwood could have done the right thing," Jake said. "He could have stopped, checked on Duke, apologized, offered to help. He could have taken responsibility. Instead, he threw money at me like my best friend's life was something that could be bought and forgotten. Well, I'm here to tell Mr. Blackwood something. Duke's life matters. My pain matters. And the next person's pain matters. We're not going away. We're not going to forget. We're going to keep standing up for what's right until you do the same." The vigil continued for another hour, with music, speakers, and a moment of silence for all the animals lost to preventable accidents. Local news covered it extensively. The video of Jake's speech went viral, viewed millions of times across various platforms. In his home office, Marcus Blackwood watched the news coverage of the vigil. His face flushed with anger and something else, something that might have been shame, though he'd never admit it. His wife, Catherine, stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. "You need to fix this, Marcus," she said quietly. Catherine was 15 years younger than him, elegant and usually content to let him handle his business affairs without comment. But this was different. "Our daughter called me today. Her friends are making fun of her at school because of what you did. She's humiliated." "I didn't do anything wrong," Marcus insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "You hit someone's dog and drove away, Marcus. How is that not wrong? The animal ran into the road while you were speeding and on your phone," Catherine interrupted. "Don't lie to me. I've seen you drive. I know how you are." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. What could he say? He remembered that day, remembered the phone call with his lawyer that had seemed so important, remembered the thud of impact, and his first thought, "This is going to be inconvenient." Not, "I hope the dog is okay." Not, "I should help." Just inconvenient. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked, and for the first time in years, he genuinely didn't know the answer. "I want you to be the man I married," Catherine said softly. "The man who used to care about things beyond money and status. Apologize, Marcus. Make it right." The call came on a Monday morning. Jake was at his motorcycle shop, working on a customer's bike, with Duke resting on a bed nearby. The dog was still recovering, still moving slowly, but Dr. Chen had been amazed by his progress. "He's got a strong will to heal," she'd said, and Jake knew it was true. "Jake Thompson speaking," Jake answered, wiping grease from his hands. "Mr. Thompson, this is Marcus Blackwood." Jake's hand tightened on the phone. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm calling to... I want to apologize for what happened to Duke, for how I acted that day. You were right. I was speeding, I was on my phone, and I should have stopped to help. I was wrong." Jake was silent for a moment, processing. This wasn't what he'd expected. "Go on." "I've spent the past few weeks watching what you and your friends have been doing, and I've been angry about it. Felt like you were attacking me, trying to ruin my life over an accident. But my wife, she made me actually watch your speech from the vigil, and she was right. I've been acting like Duke didn't matter because he's a dog, like your pain didn't matter because you're not someone I know, like consequences don't apply to me because I have money and lawyers." Marcus paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was raw. "I'm ashamed. Not because of the bad publicity, though there's been plenty of that, but because you're right. I could have killed someone driving the way I was that day. If it had been a child instead of a dog, I don't know if I could have lived with myself." "So what now?" Jake asked, his voice cautious. "I want to make this right, not with money, well, not just with money. I want to pay for Duke's medical bills, all of them, but more than that, I want to do something meaningful. I'm establishing a fund for traffic safety education. I'm going to work with the city to install more speed monitoring cameras in residential areas. And I'm going to speak publicly about what I did wrong, so maybe someone else will drive more carefully because of it." Jake looked down at Duke, who was watching him with those intelligent eyes. The dog's tail thumped softly against the bed. "I appreciate the apology, Mr. Blackwood, and I appreciate the actions you're committing to. But I want you to understand something. This isn't about you anymore. This became bigger than one incident. This is about accountability, about consequences, about remembering that our actions affect other people." "I understand," Marcus said, "and I'll spend however long it takes proving that I mean what I say. Then I guess we'll see," Jake replied. After they hung up, Jake sat quietly for a moment, then walked over to Duke. He knelt down and gently stroked the dog's ears. "What do you think, buddy? Think he means it?" Duke licked his hand, and Jake smiled. "Yeah, I guess we'll find out together." 3 months had passed since that phone call. Portland's winter had settled in, bringing rain and grey skies, but also a sense of renewal. The city was beautiful in winter, Jake thought, stripped down to its essentials, honest in a way that summer's sunshine never quite managed. Duke's recovery had been remarkable. Dr. Chen called him her miracle patient, marveling at how the dog had regained his strength and mobility. He still moved with a slight limp when he was tired, and Jake would never let him run alongside the motorcycle again. The memory of that day was too sharp, too painful. But Duke was happy, healthy, and very much alive. The real surprise had been Marcus Blackwood. True to his word, Marcus had paid all of Duke's medical bills, over $30,000 in total. But more importantly, he'd followed through on his other promises. He'd worked with the Portland City Council to establish the Drive Safe PDX initiative, a comprehensive program focused on traffic safety in residential neighborhoods. The program included new speed cameras, enhanced signage, and an educational campaign about the dangers of distracted driving. Marcus had also done something unexpected. He'd become the face of his own campaign. In a series of public service announcements aired on local TV and radio, Marcus spoke candidly about the day he hit Duke, about his negligence, and about the wake-up call that followed. He spoke about privilege, about how easy it was to forget that rules existed for a reason, about the importance of taking responsibility for your actions. The ads were uncomfortable to watch. There was something raw and genuine about Marcus's discomfort as he admitted his failures. But that authenticity made them powerful. Traffic accidents in residential Portland neighborhoods decreased by 18% in the first 2 months of the campaign. On a cold Saturday morning in early December, an unusual gathering took place at Jake's motorcycle shop. The Iron Wolves were there, of course, along with several community members who'd been involved in the vigil and protests. Dr. Sarah Chen came, bringing treats for Duke. Rachel Kim from the Oregonian attended, notebook at the ready. And to everyone's surprise, Marcus and Catherine Blackwood arrived together. Jake had organized this gathering as a way to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. He'd invited everyone who'd been part of Duke's story, the painful parts and the hopeful ones. "Thank you all for coming," Jake began, standing in the center of his shop with Duke sitting proudly beside him. The dog wore a new collar with a tag that read "Survivor" alongside his name. 3 months ago, I thought I was going to lose Duke. I was angry, heartbroken, and I wanted justice. What I got was something more complex than simple justice. I got accountability, change, and maybe the beginning of something that could prevent this from happening to someone else. He looked directly at Marcus, who met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Blackwood and I will probably never be friends," Jake said honestly. "What happened created a wound that doesn't just disappear because apologies were made and money was paid. But I do believe he's trying to do better, and I think that matters." Marcus stepped forward, his usual arrogance replaced by something more humble. "I owe everyone here an apology, not just Jake and Duke. I've spent my life believing that success meant I was above consequences, that my time was more valuable than other people's safety. That day in September, I was willing to let a living creature die rather than be inconvenienced. That's not the kind of man I want to be, and it's certainly not the kind of man my daughter should see as a role model." He pulled out his phone and showed everyone a photo of a young girl, maybe 14, sitting on the ground with a golden retriever puppy in her lap. Both were grinning. "This is my daughter Emily with Daisy, her new puppy. She asked for a dog for years, but I always said no. Too much trouble, too much mess. After everything that happened with Duke, Emily sat me down and told me she was ashamed of me. Not because of the bad publicity, but because I'd acted like a dog's life didn't matter. She said she wanted to understand why someone would hurt an animal and just walk away." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "I didn't have a good answer for her, so instead I asked her if she still wanted a dog. We got Daisy from the same shelter where Jake found Duke. And every day, when I see how much Emily loves that puppy, I think about how close I came to destroying that same kind of love." Catherine Blackwood put her hand on her husband's shoulder, and Jake could see the pride in her expression. Pride in her husband for finally being vulnerable, for finally being real. Wrench stepped forward, his imposing presence somehow gentler than usual. "The Iron Wolves started this as a fight for one of our brothers. We were angry, we wanted justice, and we were prepared to make noise until we got it. But what we learned was that sometimes the best victory isn't destruction, it's transformation. Mr. Blackwood, you screwed up, but you owned it, and you're trying to make it right. That takes guts." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Marcus shook it. The gesture felt significant, like a bridge being built between two worlds that rarely intersected. The gathering continued for another hour, with people sharing food, stories, and hope for the future. Duke was the star of the show, accepting pets and treats from everyone with his characteristic gentle dignity. He seemed to understand that all these people had come together because of him, and he bore the responsibility with grace. Dr. Chen pulled Jake aside at one point, a smile on her face. "You know, when you first brought Duke in that day, I wasn't sure he'd survive. His injuries were severe, and that kind of trauma, both physical and emotional, can break an animal's spirit. But Duke had something to fight for. He had you." "I think it was mutual," Jake replied, watching his dog. He saved me just as much as I saved him. That's what the best relationships do, Dr. Chen agreed. They make both parties better. Speaking of which, she glanced meaningfully at where Nomad was talking animatedly with Rachel Kim, both women laughing about something. Looks like some new connections are being made. Jake followed her gaze and smiled. The protests and vigils had brought together people who might never have met otherwise. Friendships had formed, relationships had started, and a community had coalesced around the idea that actions should have consequences, that accountability mattered, and that change was possible. As the gathering was winding down, Marcus approached Jake one more time. "Can I ask you something? About Duke?" "Sure," Jake said, though his protective instincts immediately kicked in. "Would it be okay if I visited him sometimes? Not at your home or anything intrusive like that, but maybe here at the shop? Emily would like to meet him, if that's all right. She's been following his recovery on the updates you've been posting." Jake considered this carefully. Part of him wanted to say no, to keep Marcus away from Duke as a final boundary. But he looked at Marcus's face and saw genuine hope there, not entitlement, and he thought about Emily, a 14-year-old girl learning about responsibility and compassion through her new puppy. "Okay," Jake said finally, "but on one condition. Anything. You bring Emily and Daisy. Duke's great with other dogs, and I think it would be good for everyone to see that life goes on, that healing is possible." Marcus's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Jake. Truly." After everyone had left and Jake was cleaning up the shop, Duke came over and leaned against his leg, a gesture the dog made when he wanted attention or reassurance. Jake knelt down and wrapped his arms around his best friend, burying his face in the familiar fur. "We did it, buddy," Jake whispered. "We got through the hard part. And you know what? I think we made things a little bit better." Duke's tail wagged, and he licked Jake's face with enthusiastic affection. In that moment, Jake felt a peace he hadn't experienced in months. The anger and pain hadn't disappeared completely, probably never would, but they'd been transformed into something more constructive. Hope. 6 months after the accident, Jake and the Iron Wolves organized one final event, a charity ride to raise money for animal shelters across Oregon, with all proceeds going to help dogs like Duke, the forgotten ones, the injured ones, the ones who just needed someone to give them a chance. Over 200 motorcycles participated in the ride, which started in Portland and wound through some of the most beautiful roads in the Pacific Northwest. Marcus Blackwood didn't ride. He'd never been on a motorcycle in his life, but he and Catherine drove alongside in their car, and at the final destination, they presented a check for $50,000 to the Oregon Humane Society. The media covered the event, of course, but this time the story wasn't about conflict or protest. It was about community, about second chances, about how people could change if they were willing to do the work. Duke rode in a specially designed sidecar attached to Jake's motorcycle, wearing protective goggles that made him look both dignified and ridiculous. He seemed to enjoy the ride, his ears flapping in the wind, his tongue lolling happily. Other riders waved at him as they passed, and Duke had become something of a celebrity in Portland's motorcycle community. At the end of the ride, as the sun was setting over the Columbia River Gorge, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake pulled off his helmet and looked around at the assembled riders, supporters and friends. Wrench stood nearby. Nomad was talking with Rachel. They'd officially started dating last month, and Marcus was kneeling down to let Duke sniff his hand, while Emily chatted excitedly about Daisy's latest puppy antics. It was imperfect and complicated and messy, just like real life, but it was also beautiful in its own way. Justice hadn't come in the form Jake had expected. It hadn't been swift or satisfying in the way revenge might have been, but it had been real, lasting, and meaningful. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. "Saw the news coverage of the charity ride. You should be proud of what you've accomplished. Duke's not just a survivor. He's an inspiration." Jake typed back, "He always has been. I'm just glad other people finally get to see it." As the gathering began to break up and riders prepared for the journey home, Jake loaded Duke back into the sidecar. Before starting his bike, he leaned down close to his best friend. "You ready to go home, buddy?" Duke's tail wagged and his eyes met Jake's with perfect understanding and trust. "Yeah," Jake said softly, starting the engine. "Me too." 1 year later, the coffee shop in Portland's Pearl District was busy on this particular Sunday morning, filled with the chatter of customers and the hiss of espresso machines. At a corner table sat Jake Thompson and Marcus Blackwood, an unlikely pair sharing coffee and conversation. This had become something of a monthly ritual for them, not quite friendship, but something more than simple acquaintance. They talked about business, family, the city they both loved, and occasionally about Duke. "Emily's graduating middle school next month," Marcus said, showing Jake a photo on his phone of his daughter with Daisy, who'd grown from a small puppy into a beautiful adult dog. "She wants to be a veterinarian, says Dr. Chen is her hero." Jake smiled. "That's wonderful. Dr. Chen would be thrilled to hear that. She told me last week that she's glad I hit Duke," Marcus said, then quickly clarified at Jake's raised eyebrow. "Not glad that Duke was hurt, obviously, but glad because it made me become a better person. She said for years she watched me being someone she didn't respect, and now she's proud to tell people I'm her dad." "That must feel good," Jake said. "It does. It's also terrifying. I spent so many years being one kind of person, successful by conventional measures, but hollow inside. Now I'm trying to be different, and some days I'm not sure I know how." "That uncertainty is probably a good sign," Jake observed. "It means you're actually thinking about your choices instead of just acting on autopilot." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Marcus asked, "How's Duke doing?" "He's great. Still has that limp when he's tired, but otherwise you'd never know he'd been through what he went through. We're actually training him to be a therapy dog. Dr. Chen suggested it. Turns out Duke's really good at comforting people who are anxious or in pain. That's perfect for him," Marcus said. "He's got the temperament for it." "Speaking of which," Jake pulled out his phone, "I got some interesting news this week. The city council wants to name the new dog park in Laurelhurst after Duke. Duke's Run, or something like that. They're saying he became a symbol for traffic safety and community activism." Marcus looked genuinely pleased. "That's incredible, Jake. He deserves it. The ceremony's in 2 weeks. You and Catherine and Emily should come. We'd be honored." As they finished their coffee and prepared to leave, Marcus hesitated. "Jake, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for standing up and demanding accountability, even when it would have been easier to take the money and walk away. You changed my life, and you probably saved others by making me face what I'd done." Jake considered his response carefully. "I didn't do it alone. The Iron Wolves, the community, everyone who showed up, that's what made the difference. But you know what the most important part was? You were willing to change. Not everyone is." They shook hands, and as they walked out of the coffee shop into the bright Portland morning, they went their separate ways, not as enemies, not quite as friends, but as two men who'd learned important lessons about accountability, consequences, and the possibility of redemption. At home, Duke was waiting at the door when Jake arrived, tail wagging furiously. Jake knelt down and accepted the enthusiastic greeting, laughing as Duke licked his face. "Miss me, buddy? I was only gone an hour." Duke's response was to grab his leash from the hook by the door and bring it to Jake, his meaning clear. Walk time. All right, Jake said, attaching the leash to Duke's collar. "Let's go to the park." As they walked through their neighborhood, Jake reflected on the past year. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and frustrations, moments of anger and sadness that resurged when he least expected them. But there had also been growth, healing, and the satisfaction of knowing that Duke's story had made a real difference. The Drive Safe PDX initiative was still going strong, and traffic accidents in residential areas continued to decline. The charity ride had become an annual event, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for animal shelters. Marcus Blackwood had become an unlikely advocate for traffic safety and corporate social responsibility, using his platform and resources to promote causes he once wouldn't have noticed. And Duke? Duke was just happy being Duke, loving, loyal, and living proof that even the darkest moments could lead to light. As they entered the park and Jake unclipped the leash, letting Duke run free in the designated off-leash area, he thought about the words he'd spoken at the vigil all those months ago. Duke's life matters. It had seemed like such a simple statement at the time, almost too obvious to need saying. But in a world that often valued some lives more than others, where wealth and status could shield people from consequences, where a dog could be dismissed as just property, that statement had been revolutionary. Duke's life mattered. And because people had stood up and insisted on that truth, other lives had been saved, other dogs were protected, other communities were safer. Jake watched Duke play with other dogs in the park, his limp barely noticeable, his joy absolutely contagious. A year ago, he'd almost lost his best friend. Now, Duke was thriving, helping others, and living his best life. "Not bad for a rescue dog, huh, buddy?" Jake called out. Duke looked back at him and barked once, a sound of pure happiness, before returning to his play. And Jake Thompson, standing in the autumn sunshine with his hands in his pockets and peace in his heart, couldn't help but smile. They'd been through hell and come out the other side, together, just the way it was always meant to be. Author's note: this story was inspired by the principle that accountability and consequences matter, regardless of wealth or status. While the characters and specific events are fictional, the themes of community action, traffic safety, and the profound bonds between humans and their animal companions are very real. If you've been affected by a similar situation, know that your voice matters, your pain is valid, and change is possible when people come together with determination and purpose.